Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Just me again today. We have some guests hopefully coming on this coming week, but I've got Gary Hutt, who is with GB Boxing. So they were just at the Olympics. He's back home now, so he's hopefully going to come on this week. Going to bring on Ed Cosner. And Ed Cosner is essentially a veteran strength conditioning coach. Used to work with the San Antonio Spurs back in the days, worked all around the world with different rugby teams. It's now in tactical. So yeah, he's been on for a very long time, so that'll be a really good one. Going to have Mitch Finlay in September, who did the boxing post-activation potentiation enhancement study, the one that I covered on the channel as well. So we've got some good ones lined up and should be bringing on more coaches from the Olympics. Probably bring Travis McMaster back on, who was with the All Black Sevens at the Olympics, and should be bringing Cass back on as well, who was with the Dutch Judo Olympic team. So a lot of cool stuff, especially after the Olympic cycle as well, just to kind of get an insight into what people are doing there. So those will be coming up. But today, to fill this gap with no guest, I'm going to run through a supplement that I clickbaited the shit out of the title of, which was creatine being a miracle supplement. Now, obviously, no supplement is a miracle, but creatine is one of the ones, in fact, is the only one that is proven to work and will be considered a tier 1 supplement. If you listen to the Eric Helms podcast, the latest one on the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast, where he covers his tiers, creatine is number 1. And the reason it's number 1 is because it's very difficult to get through a normal diet, and it tends to work. Well, it's proven to be the most effective out of most supplements. Now, you could say protein powder would be a tier 1, or fish oil, etc., but you can get those through your diet, and you can get the amount you need through your diet. So they're not essentially, I guess they're not necessary, like something like creatine, where it's near impossible to get through your diet. So I'm not a registered dietitian, nutritionist, anything like that, but I don't think you need to be to really understand how creatine works and the nuances behind it all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover everything you need to know about creatine. So if you are taking it or not taking it, then you know exactly what you want or need to do, what to look for in a creatine product. So you're essentially armed with what to do. Now, there's obviously a philosophy and school of thought that, hey, you don't need any supplements. I tend to fall in the camp where if you can get a tiny edge out of something that's not going to harm you, I would take that. And I think creatine is well studied enough to fit into that camp to be something you should be taking. So let's just start with how creatine works. And if we go into the energy system, I guess, model, we have the ATP PCR system, or the alactic energy system. And essentially this energy system is driven through phosphocreatine, which is that PCR. And that is the readily available energy source within the muscle. So when you're doing high intensity exercise, that is the fastest energy source available because it's already there. And essentially PCR is essentially phosphate molecule and a creatine molecule, and they are paired together to make phosphocreatine. So what we're doing when we're taking more creatine in, we're able to accumulate more of these phosphocreatines, or those PCRs. And having more of these essentially floating around the muscle means we have more energy readily available. Now, we know that muscles, for energy, they use ATP, which you've probably heard of, adenosine triphosphate. And by TP, triphosphate, it means there are 3 phosphate molecules on this ATP. And as energy is used, it loses a phosphate. So then it becomes ADP. So that's diphosphate. So 2 phosphates, and it can go all the way down to AMP for 1 phosphate. But just to keep it simple, we go ATP, we lose a phosphate when we use it for energy. Now it's ADP. To replenish ADP back to ATP, so 2 phosphates to 3 phosphates, we can take a phosphate from this phosphocreatine that's floating around within the muscles. And that's how we have readily available energy that's there for very short burst, high intensity exercise. So by taking creatine, you have more of these around. You're able to essentially regenerate or resynthesize this ATP quickly and have more of it to do it, which is why we see typically improvements in strength, improvements in power, improvements in short event, performance. So that's pretty much in a nutshell of with how creatine works. Now, to go into more frequently asked questions around creatine, and I think the first objection most people have are side effects, and you've probably heard them all. You may have even potentially experienced some of them yourself, or you've heard of people who say not to take it because of certain side effects. I will tell you now that pretty much every side effect is not actually a side effect; it's more of a placebo, and or just people being stupid. So I'll run through, I guess, most of the common ones that stop people from taking it. And the first one I think is weight gain. And so many people will look at creatine and be like, hey, if I take creatine, I'm going to add 2-3 pounds or whatever it is in water weight. So it's not going to help me. And then it's going to be harder for me to stay in my weight class, etc. Now, the problem is this small amount of initial weight gain is a good thing. That's what you need for that phosphocreatine to be around in your muscles. And typically you're looking at, I think it's around 1.2% increase in body weight from taking creatine. And this doesn't seem to last long term. It seems to be just through the initial phases of when you're saturating the muscle with creatine, and then it kind of dies down. So it's not something that's permanent, one. Two, it's a helpful thing to help you with the energy system, two. And if you really are, say, maybe on the edge of your weight class and you can't afford to have that, you can stop taking creatine about 4 to 6 weeks out from weighing in, and you're still going to retain the benefits of creatine. It takes a while for, I guess, the performance benefits of creatine to wash out. So you have quite a bit of time where you can say stop taking it and have that water weight drop, but still have the benefits of creatine. So that solves that problem. The other thing is if you are a responder or non-responder. I'm a non-responder to creatine, meaning my weight doesn't change at all. Honestly, I don't feel any difference with pretty much any supplement, but you'll find that you either are a responder or a non-responder. And it doesn't matter too much. It could be down to dietary related, whereas you're getting quite a bit of creatine already through your diet. You're still not going to get the maximum amount, but you might be getting enough to saturate the muscles, and that little top up doesn't make much difference. Obviously, if you are vegan, vegetarian, then yes, you're going to see the most pronounced changes because you're getting pretty much zero creatine into your diet because you're getting it mainly from red meat. So bear that in mind if being a responder or non-responder. Again, just because you're a non-responder doesn't mean that creatine doesn't help you. It just means that you might not see the weight changes. So just bear that in mind. The other one is stomach issues. So I'm sure you've heard like people talk about creatine potentially upsetting their stomach. Now, if that's the case, it could be the supplement particular brand or what it's with. So not all creatines are pure creatines. I'll run through some of that a little later, but if you're getting creatine with like dextrose and a bunch of other stuff, yeah, that could cause problems for sure. The International Society of Sports Nutrition, they concluded there's no evidence that exists that creatine intake increases the risk of gut issues. And this is like diarrhea, cramping, bloating, if taken in the recommended doses. So if you're taking 5 grams a day, I'm not going to say you're not going to have stomach issues, but you're it's going to be pretty rare, and it's probably not going to be the creatine. So for example, a study involving 59 elite male soccer players, they were segregated into 3 groups: a placebo group, a group that received 2 daily doses of 5 grams each, and a group receiving a single 10-gram dose daily for 28 days. There were no significant gastrointestinal issues in the placebo and the 5-gram creatine dose group. However, some stomach issues were reported in the 10-gram group. So it could be a dose thing if you are seeing stomach problems taking creatine, which means you just take 5 grams a day instead of damn 10. And I'm going to go into dosing just after this side effect stuff anyway, so I'll cover that as well. The other one is obviously kidney function. This is probably the number one reason people will say not to take creatine, and it's often I guess you could say misinformed. So we have, and I think the reason for that is people confuse creatine with creatinine, which are 2 different. I guess creatinine is a marker of stress and kidney function, whereas creatine is the creatine molecule. So the International Society of Sports Nutrition, they concluded that based on all the available evidence on creatine and kidney function, creatine does not negatively impact kidney function of both athletes and non-athletes. And this includes studies in American football players, healthy athletes, diabetic patients, resistance training athletes, and even patients with renal disease. So even patients with kidney problems, they don't see problems taking creatine. So it is very unlikely that if you are having creatine kidney problems, it is from the creatine. Again, obviously consult your health professional. This is not medical advice, but you will probably see elevated creatinine levels in blood tests. Obviously, from creatine, which is completely fine. Obviously, there could be other underlying things. So again, consult a medical professional, etc., etc. The other one is dehydration. So people will talk about, oh, I take creatine, I have to drink more water, otherwise I'm going to be dehydrated and I'm going to get cramp, which is another load of bullshit. Honestly, I hate this one so much because I've had so many athletes say this to me. Obviously, I don't force any athlete to take supplements; it's their choice. But it's just a funny one that always seems to come up. So some athletes claim they have dry mouth or dehydration when they take creatine, or they cramp. That's a very common one as well, even though dehydration is not the cause of cramp. Dehydration is cramp is a multifactorial problem, and dehydration may be part of it, but being dehydrated is not why you're cramping. And there's a really good paper on that. I broke it down a long time ago. I have to go back and revisit it, but essentially it's an overexcitation of some of the nerves. And that's why when you say drink pickle juice, or you have vinegar and hot chilies and things, or you just hold a stretch, you can mitigate that cramp because you can essentially send those nerve impulses somewhere else. But yeah, that's another different topic. But essentially, there's no concrete evidence of dehydration when taking creatine. So numerous studies have indicated that incorporating creatine supplementation into training and or competition either exhibits no impact or diminishes the occurrence of injuries, dehydration, or muscle cramp. So funny enough, within the research, creatine tends to help these problems, not make it worse. And these studies showed that athletes undergoing rigorous training could receive 15 to 25 grams a day of creatine for 4 to 12 weeks with no documented side effects. So again, dehydration is not one of those things that's going to happen when you take creatine. It may even help. Obviously, the other one is hair loss. It's a funny one because this myth is still around and it's just based off one study that didn't even actually look at hair loss. They just looked at DHT. So essentially, it can be traced back to a single study in 2009. Basically, males aged between 18 and 19, they took 25 grams of creatine per day for a week, which would be, quote unquote, the loading phase. And then they followed a maintenance phase of 14 days. And I'm going to cover loading and stuff like that in a bit. But compared to the placebo group, the creatine group had a 56% increase in DHT levels, which is a hormone associated with hair loss after the loading phase, and a 40% increase above the initial levels during the maintenance phase. Now, although the study did not specifically investigate hair loss as an outcome, many individuals inferred a potential link between creatine and hair loss due to this increase in DHT. Now, a review of all the literature on hair loss and creatine use found no evidence that creatine use leads to hair loss. So it's basically never been replicated, even within the meta-analysis or systematic reviews. Again, no outcome of hair loss taking creatine. So, yeah, I wouldn't even worry about that. Even within hormones as well, like 12 other studies have looked at effects of creatine supplements on testosterone with pretty high dosing protocols, 3 to 25 grams for 6 days to 12 weeks. Essentially, 10 studies found no significant variations in testosterone. 5 studies found no increase in free testosterone, and only 2 found small, insignificant increases in testosterone after 6 to 7 days of supplementation. So you're not going to have any hormonal changes either, which is why creatine is not a steroid, even though that still lives on for some reason. Creatine is like seen as this gateway drug or something into injecting your butt with all sorts of stuff. So I think that covers all the side effects. So again, pretty much nothing innocuous going on. Creatine is literally found in food. So if you're having problems with creatine, you're probably going to have problems with red meat and stuff. So just bear that in mind. So let's cover some more of these frequently asked questions around creatine, mechanisms, how to take it. I'm going to cover all of it. So let's start with, is there a best time to take your creatine? And there is not, to put it bluntly. But there is one study that showed the potential for it to have better impact on hypertrophy if you take it after training versus another time, but not on strength. But this was one study, and we know creatine does not have any acute effects on performance, recovery, etc. It's something you have to take daily to accumulate. So the mechanisms don't really match up there. And again, hasn't been replicated, anything like that. So my advice, if you're taking creatine, you got to take it daily, because that's just how you're going to keep your muscles fully saturated. Now, how long does creatine take to work? So if you're not on creatine, or you haven't started taking creatine, whatever, how long does it take to work? This is when we can get into the different protocols here as well. So a typical diet has 1 to 2 grams of creatine a day, which is what I was going to say, which kind of backs up my point earlier when I'm saying, okay, it's hard to get creatine just through your diet, because you're going to have to eat a shit ton of meat, and it's going to cost too much. It's also going to, you can't train if you're eating that much meat. You'll be stuck on the couch and on the toilet. So what we can do is, depending on the protocol you use, is how fast it's going to take to fully saturate the muscles with creatine. So typically you're looking at like a month if you're taking just the maintenance, or quote unquote maintenance dose daily, which is around 3 to 5 grams. So 28 days or a month it's going to take there. Or you can load the creatine and it'll take you a week. And just to run through the creatine loading, typically you're taking 20 grams a day. So you're splitting that dose maybe into 2 or 4 doses a day. And you're doing that for a week, and then you're going back down to 3 to 5 grams a day. And that'll be your way of essentially getting there faster. Now, it is not necessary to load creatine. Well, many people will say you need to load it, and then you need to go on a maintenance, and then you need to cycle off. And that's the most retarded shit I've ever heard in my life. I can't believe people still talk about cycling creatine. You're not doing fucking steroids. When you take creatine, you take it daily because you want to just keep the muscle saturated creatine. That's it. You just literally take your teaspoon or serving size, whatever it is in that creatine supplement. You take it daily, and that's all you do. That's it. You don't need to load it, maintenance, then go off. Then, yeah, that basically goes against everything to do with common sense, research, science, mechanisms, everything. So you don't have to load. So if you want to maybe get there faster, you can. But again, it's just much easier just to take a scoop every day or 5 grams every day versus just loading it. And don't cycle it. That's pretty simple. Now, another question that often comes up is if you should take creatine on rest days. Yes, because you want to take it every day. And that just keeps you essentially topped up. And if you miss a day, don't worry about it. Again, the washout period is like 4 to 6 weeks. So you're good there. Now, in terms of what you should have your creatine with, many people talk about, okay, you're going to mix it in orange juice or the old creatine formulations back in the early 2010s or maybe the early 2000s, where it was, I think it was Muscle Tech. They had one that was like with 50 grams of carbs. So no wonder everyone saw huge weight gain taking it, because they were taking in like 200 plus calories every time of just pure sugar when they were taking their creatine. But typically you mix it in anything. You can dry scoop it if you want and just drink water with it, or mix it in your smoothies, whatever. You can even mix it in hot liquid. It doesn't break it down or anything like that. So you've got a lot of places that you can take creatine. It's just a matter of taking it each day and making it a habit, essentially. If you have any questions, throw them down in the comments too. There's also, and then I think that the last thing I cover before going into how to actually pick the creatine supplement that you want is the type of creatine. And I will tell you now, every supplement company is trying to sell you a different form of creatine because you need to try and market something. And if you're just trying to market plain creatine monohydrate, it's pretty difficult because it's been around for so long and you're trying to look for a point of difference. Okay. So they're going to come up with every other creatine form: HCl, ethyl ester, shit, I don't even know how many others there are. Alkaline. There's like a bunch. And you're paying more for nothing. In fact, often you're paying more for less. Creatine monohydrate is shown to maximally saturate the muscle with creatine. And obviously you cannot get more than maximal. And a lot of other forms of creatine don't actually maximally saturate the muscle. So you're getting essentially worse results taking other forms of creatine while spending more money. So that becomes a problem. Now, one of the more prominent forms is creatine HCl or hydrochloride, and people will often market this, or people will take it because, again, we talked about the stomach issues before around creatine monohydrate. They think, oh, creatine HCl, it comes with an acid, so it means that it's going to digest faster and it's going to absorb better, and they're going to have less stomach issues. Well, obviously, digesting and absorbing better is already false because we know that creatine monohydrate maximally saturates the muscle. So that's obviously out the window. And then around stomach issues, it's going to cause less stomach discomfort. Well, we know if you just take 5 grams a day, you're probably not going to have that problem. Yeah, and it's not more bioavailable than monohydrate. So that pretty much cuts that whole line of thinking out. So and in terms of HCl being able to saturate the muscle, it seems to saturate the muscle similar to monohydrate from the research we currently have. So you can take that, it's just going to cost you more, but it doesn't really have any other benefits. So bear that in mind as well. Now, there's also micronized creatine. You often see that on labels as well. So you have creatine monohydrate and you have micronized creatine monohydrate. It's just essentially creatine broken down into smaller particles. It does not mean, again, it's often marketed as, okay, it digests faster, it's more bioavailable. Again, creatine monohydrate 100% maximally saturates the muscle, so you can't get any better. So it doesn't matter even if it is more, if it digests better, etc., or absorbs better, because you're already getting maximal saturation through just normal monohydrate. So again, if you just want maybe something that mixes a little better within liquid, micronized is an option. I wouldn't make that your, what would you call it, your main buying point for a creatine supplement. So yeah, that's just something to be aware of as well. And I think that pretty much covers everything regarding the actual creatine supplement. But I want to actually run through what it is to look for when you're buying creatine, because it's easy to go on Amazon and just pick the first thing that's on there, right? Oh, it's $20, has 100 servings, cool, good to go. There are a few things you need to look out for. And I'll give you a quick, easy checklist that you can use. The first one is the sourcing of the creatine. The ideal source is you want to find CreaPure. So that's CreaPure, CreaPure. And that is a brand of creatine. It's out of Germany, and it is the gold standard of creatine monohydrate because it's tested to 99.9% pure. And they're a little CreaPure creatines are obviously a little more expensive than just a normal creatine monohydrate from China because of this gold standard. It typically costs companies, I think it's $17 or $18 a kilo to buy from there, because I've inquired from there before anyway, so I know, which is why it'll cost you a bit more. But you know you're getting proper creatine, and you know you're getting it that's not going to be mixed with some other shit. So CreaPure is something you should look for. It'll be on the label. There will be a little stamp on there and everything, so you'll know. And companies will not miss out on telling you if they're using CreaPure creatine. So that's number one. Number two, because you are a competitive combat athlete, you want to look for third-party testing. And third-party testing is not the supplement saying it's third-party tested. Third-party testing is having a stamp from a testing body. So you might see an Informed Sport tick. You might see, I think it's NSF. There's a whole bunch of them. Essentially, you want to see that Informed Sport tick or tested for sport. There's a bunch of different ones on there, and that means that the product, basically the company receives the product and they send one of the batch to a third party or factory where they test it. So has nothing to do with the actual company itself. They test it, and then they essentially send a report back saying it has no contaminants, I guess nothing that's going to get you banned under a drug test. So USADA, WADA, whatever else is being done, you're not going to get popped for any steroids or anything like that. Now, there is also a certificate of analysis that companies will have, and that kind of just tells you, hey, my creatine is pure, it doesn't have heavy metals and other contaminants in it, but that does not tell you if it has, tren, D-bol, all that other shit in there. Now, people will talk about if he listens to podcasts with Eric, people talk about, oh, that's good. I want to get my supplements tainted so I make gains. The problem is that's in such small amounts, it's not going to do anything for you. It's just going to get you popped in a drug test. And if you're competing, obviously, in a drug tested sport, NCAA, if you're in college, or more professional MMA or other organizations, obviously not jiu-jitsu, because everyone there is just fucking juiced to the gills. You probably wouldn't even be worrying about creatine if you're doing a high level jiu-jitsu and you're just poking yourself with needles, but you get my point. So you can look at the COAs, the certificate of analysis. All companies have them. You can ask the companies for them too. But the biggest thing is the informed sport tech for the third-party testing. So if you have CreaPure and you have third-party testing, that's pretty much your top two things you're looking for. Outside of that, it's pretty much just a preference on brand, price, anything like that. You should also just make sure that it's not, well, obviously you should make sure it's just pure creatine monohydrate, but typically you're trying to make sure there's nothing else in there. So you can either go pure creatine unflavored. You can get flavored creatines. If you like to mix, I don't know, if you like to drink your creatine flavor, you just want a flavored drink, that's completely fine. Obviously, you're going to potentially have a few extra grams of carbohydrates in there or whatever else. But that's up to you and your call. I typically find just pure creatine monohydrate itself is just easy enough to mix or do whatever you want. Now, obviously, you have other forms. You have creatine like capsules. I would avoid the pills and capsules at all costs. They cost so much more because you can't fit 5 grams into a capsule. You have to take like 4 to 6 of them just to get, and that's usually like a 3-gram serving. And then I wouldn't even bother with that. Get the powder, it's way cheaper. Obviously, now creatine gummies are like the fucking new fad. I would typically, look, I wouldn't say avoid them, but you're typically taking in 7 grams of sugar with your serving each time. So if you can afford to do that, sure. But again, the powders make it so much easier. And I don't think there's any other forms of creatine currently. That's pretty much it. Gummies, capsules, and powder. And the powder is usually the best way to go. Again, there are flavored formulations. They usually mix them with other things, or they're like post-workout formulations to help with recovery and stuff. Sure, there's nothing wrong with doing something like that if you want to do that. But yeah, again, just plain creatine monohydrate is an easy way to go. Now, I'm not going to recommend any brands on here, but just because it's so much easier, just I gave you the blueprint of what to look for. And if you have a personal preference on a brand or whatever it is, there you go. Just bear in mind on Amazon that I think it's only like 8% of supplements or of creatine supplements on Amazon are actually third-party tested. So Amazon's typically not the best place to go for a creatine supplement. And maybe I'll try to help you out with some companies off the top of my head. But BPN would be one. I know they third-party test, and they have athletes using that. So that's one of them. I think Legion supplements third-party test as well. Don't quote me on that. But again, I don't think they do pure creatine. I think theirs is a post-workout formula. Honestly, I'm out of the loop with creatine, so I can't tell you what else there is. But essentially, those are 2 brands that come to mind. But if you're just looking for CreaPure, third-party testing, and then from there, you're going to be sorted anyway. That's like 99% of the job done. So that wraps up this podcast. Please make sure like, subscribe, check out the YouTube channel, the Instagram. I'm posting more, trying to get more content out there for you guys as well, just so we can keep spreading good training advice. And I'll catch you on the next podcast when we have a guest going on.